Assalamu alaikum. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. We thank you for joining us for this Sunday's not family Taleem, public address and our Sunday Taleem. And this Sunday's topic is going to be COVID-sations, how we can protect ourselves and our families. I am Imam Ahmad Shaheed, and I'll give a brief introduction to the discussion from a Quranic or religious standpoint. And then Sister Salimah Cogbill will be presenting from her perspective. Um, so, just to kind of set the stage, in the world that we live in the life and the world that has been created by Allah, by God, He has said to us in the Quran, in our holy book, Inna fi samawati wal ardi la ayatan li mu'minina. Indeed, within the heavens and the earth are signs for the believers, for the mu'mineen, that Allah created this world and all that is within it for us to analyze, to look at and digest. And He uses the exact same word for the ayats, the verses of the Quran, as He does to say that there are signs in the heavens and the earth. And that particular surah goes on to say, and in the creation of yourselves and what He disperses of moving creatures are signs, ayat, for people who have a certain faith or a certain belief. So not only in the world, but only also within our bodies and within ourselves, there are ayat. So He uses the same word. So then when we look at the words and when we look at the world, we should look at ourselves and see these as signs. We should study them. We should look at the world and what's going on with climate change, what's going on with the coronavirus. We should be looking at everything in the world and looking for the signs that are what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trying to say to us. That when we talk about the signs, Allah at another point in time says that He created the sun, the moon, and the stars, signs for us. And when we study and we see how mankind studies the sun, the moon, and the stars, they come up with we have the beautiful example of Prophet Ibrahim. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be pleased with him. When he studied the sun, the moon, and the stars, that all of these came to him, helped him to understand the concept of Tawheed, the oneness of Allah. So he was a scientist in the way he studied the rise and fall of the sun, the rise and fall of the stars and their rotation. And he was a scientist, and that same passion for scientific study, that same passion for interrogation of the environment that we find ourselves in, is something that we should follow as children of Prophet. And so, as we look to our sciences and we look to the study of all of these different systems of knowledge, when we in Latin, the word ology just means the study of. So the world of biology, the study of life. We look at the world of geology, the study of the earth. We look at the world of zoology, the study of animals. That we should have this deep study, this deep respect for study and interrogation of the world that we find ourselves in, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a Rabbil Alameen. He is the ruler of all systems of knowledge, the ruler of all of these worlds of knowledge, all of these different things that we find ourselves in. So Allah calls us to study those things and try to learn and take. There's uh, and just try to digest it. There's a old book that my mom would have in her home called Reader's Digest. And when we as readers, we want to digest all of this knowledge. We want to take in what's good and beneficial. We want to search for the food, prepare the food, and then take in what's best, so it makes us strong and makes us proper. So we want to digest all of these different systems of knowledge that we find ourselves embracing in our society. And not every uh, knowledge is beneficial. We live in a world of fake news and alternative facts where it is so hard sometimes to know what it is you're supposed to digest. You don't want to take in the wrong thing, the wrong information. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even has guidance for us about that in the Quran. That when he says that, we were supposed to study, we're supposed to be thinkers, we're supposed to be analyzers of all that's there. But he says, even if you hear something from someone you don't, who is fasikun, not Taleem, but fasikun, someone who is defiantly disobedient, you should still not ignore the person, not push them to the side, but just investigate what it is they have to say so that you don't do unwitting harm or unwitting truth. And when we have our leaders telling us to do things like inject ourselves with Clorox or things of that nature, which you need to do some investigation on, even if this is coming from a source that would typically be trusted. When we look at our government, and a lot of people have issues with some of the practices and some of the things that have happened in the past with the Tuskegee experiment and other things, that we as a community have a deep need and a deep uh, it is understandable that we want to investigate more and learn more. We just don't want to be those who are caught up with just anything that anybody says. My mom used to tell me, you believe half of what you read and none of what you hear. It is okay to question, it is okay to seek more information. But, sometimes it's hard for us to figure out what information is the best information to come from, what information, best information to seek. So you want to seek that information of those who have been there, those who are a part of the situation, those who have some type of critical knowledge that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is blessed with some level of interest. And then it's still okay for you to question that. But uh, I just to say that I'm reminded of uh, the final example that I wanted to bring is the example of the archers on Mount Uhud, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is given a specific order to these archers who are up on the mount to stay there and hold that position for this particular battle. But they disobeyed and go against his direct orders. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala counsels Prophet Muhammad and says that it was a mercy for me that you were kind to them, that you listen to them. And not only should you be kind to them, but you forgive them. Plus, you should take sure with them, and then uh, make a decision based on that sure, and then go forth with your trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is kind of advising us and advising Prophet Muhammad to, before he makes a decision on this course of action, ask the people who are intimately involved in that situation. Get their side of the story before you render your final opinion. And then once you hear their story, you can still you make your own decision and trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so with that, I don't want to take too much time away from our presenter. And so we are presenting this information again as students who have studied the world that we have found ourselves in, and hopeful that you can take some benefit. You can find the good food, the good sustenance. You can digest what is best from this and continue to ask us questions. So if you have questions throughout this presentation, please ask them through the chat, through the questions, and we will have a time at the end of the presentation for us to ask questions. And so not only do we have Sister Salimah Cogbill, who will introduce herself and give her own biography, but we also have some other presenters who are waiting in the wings who will give you their stories and their details. But I will turn the floor over to Sister Salimah Cogbill to explain that a little bit more.
Assalamu alaikum. Alhamdulillah, I'm glad to be here today. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. And so to talk about this topic that has been with us for over a year now, the first COVID case in the U.S. Was confirmed in January of 2020, even though the COVID-19 was discovered in 2019, a few months prior in Wuhan, China. And so we've been, dealing with this for a year now. And so the question may be, well, why are we talking about this? Because it's still very much a part of our world. And we may have a little bit of COVID fatigue. I know I do. So I imagine that others might, have that, and we might be just tired of this, justifiably so. But I wanted to come and remind us today that it is still very much with us and is still very much a threat to us. And how can we take precautions to protect ourselves and our families? You know, the Quran tells us to save ourselves and to save our families, and that incorporates every aspect of our lives, including our health and well-being. So I'm going to try to be as brief as I can so that I don't overwhelm or overburden with information, but try to be as succinct as I can be so that we can have a clear, hopefully, inshallah, Lord willing, we can walk away with a clearer direction on how we continue to manage this situation. The last thing I'll say with regard to this is that if you are here, if you can hear this presentation, alhamdulillah, you made it this far. So there is hope, and that should give all of us hope that we are here and we're grateful to be here, and that we can get through this, inshallah. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump into my presentation. There we go. So this talk is entitled COVID-sations, talk about COVID and how can we protect ourselves and our families. I'm going to see if I can get this. There we go. Okay. So a few disclaimers before we get started today. My name is Salimah Shaheed. My background is in public health. I have a master's in public health from St. Louis University that I received in 2009. My specific focus area was epidemiology, which basically means is the study of or the quantification of public health disease and illness. So basically, we're the people who tell you who, what, where, when, why, how, kind of the data. Actually, I don't want that. I don't want that. Thank you. Uh, just kind of describe the public health condition. So after graduation, I worked for a few years in health communication, and while I was in school, how to communicate complicated public health topics to those who don't study public health but who need the information in order to make good decisions for themselves and their families. And then I worked for a few years with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, working in quarantine public health with international passengers and travelers arriving to the U.S., monitoring for infectious disease for the purposes of preventing spread here in the U.S. I also have a few years background in emergency preparedness, working to create plans for how we deal with public health crises like this one. So I have a few years of experience. I don't currently work in that field now. And so I'm not coming to you as an expert. What I am coming to you as is someone who is qualified to at least review public health information and present that to the public. I am not a medical professional, and I do not and will not give medical advice. This presentation is for informational purposes only, so it's for you to as Imam Ahmad said, to take in the information, do your additional research, and make the best decision for yourself. This is not to give medical advice. It's also a broad overview. This topic is very large, and I'm probably presenting a lot today, and I'm only scratching the surface. So if I miss something, it's probably intentional because of time. And if I miss something, feel free to ask a question about it, but it's not meant to be an exhaustive presentation. We just don't have the time, and I don't want to get to the limits of my experience. So before we want to talk about COVID, but we want to explain what COVID is. So COVID is a virus, and so this graphic here I thought was really good to talk about what exactly is a virus. So let's see, we'll get this to play.
We've heard a lot about the coronavirus recently, but what is a virus really? Viruses are submicroscopic organisms found almost everywhere on Earth. They can infect anything, from animals to plants to fungi to bacteria. Sometimes viruses cause deadly disease. Other times they trigger no reaction at all. Diseases caused by viruses include rabies, herpes, Ebola, and COVID-19, to name a few. Viruses are very, very small, just a millionth of an inch, some 10,000 times smaller than a grain of salt. Since they come in many different shapes and sizes, none of them work in exactly the same way. Of the millions of viruses that occur in nature, only a very small number of them have the ability to do us harm. Even though viruses vary in complexity, they all consist of genetic material, RNA or DNA, packaged together with proteins and surrounded by a lipid membrane. Viruses dock onto the surface of cells and trick the cell into letting them in. Once inside, the virus hijacks its host, forcing the cell to make more virus copies. Since viruses cannot replicate without a host, they are often referred to as parasitic. While good medications to treat virus infections exist, vaccines have proven successful in stopping viruses from spreading.
Okay, sorry about that. There we go. Okay, so it was like, oh, so why are we talking about a virus? And so the point that I wanted to make with sharing this video is to talk about, to point out a few things. One, that if you cannot see a virus, it is you need a very high powered microscope to see it. They are very, 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 very small, organisms, and that viruses, they need a host to survive. So they have to co-opt or take over your cells and use your cells to make more of them to continue to spread. Why is this important for COVID? Because you can't see it and you don't know that it's spreading. So we have to depend on other things in order to protect ourselves, because we're protecting ourselves from something we cannot see and we cannot manage. So COVID-19 specifically is a type of coronavirus. There are many coronaviruses out there. Most of the coronaviruses, say that 3 times fast. Most of them are typically harmless or cause minor illness in human beings. Think of like the minor common cold, for example. But a few of them have been known to cause severe illness and even death in human beings. The first one noted is SARS, the coronavirus that caused the SARS outbreak, in 2003, that came out of China. There was a Middle Eastern respiratory syndrome, or MERS, that came out of the Gulf states or Middle East in 2012. And then we have this COVID-19, which is basically coronavirus that was discovered in 2019. That's how it got its name. So these are 3 types of coronaviruses that have been found to cause severe illness and death in human beings. What's also significant about those 3 viruses is that they were novel and that they were new, meaning that we had not experienced them as a human population before. And so we didn't have any natural or built immunity to it. So our bodies are learning how to deal with these viruses. So just to bring clarity to this, so COVID-19 versus the flu. So similarities between these two, they're both viruses, and they're both respiratory viruses, meaning they affect your respiratory system, your lungs, airways, and things like that. They are both contagious through the air and either through aerosols, or sprays in the air, or droplets, which are heavier, or on surfaces. You can contract it that way. They have similar symptoms: fever, chills, body aches, runny nose, things like that. And they both can result in death, more severe cases. The difference is, and here's why this is really important to show that this virus is something different than we've experienced before, is the origin. So the virus that causes the flu is influenza A or B, whereas this virus that causes COVID-19 is a coronavirus. So they're structured differently. They have some different symptoms. So, for example, COVID-19, one of the symptoms of it that is different from the flu is the new loss of taste and smell, and some gastro issues, excuse me. Um, Also, the flu, the symptom onset from the time you are infected to the time you might see symptoms is typically between 1 to 4 days. Whereas for the COVID-19, it's typically between 2 to 14 days. And what that is an incubation period, meaning that you can have the virus or be infected with the virus, but you may not display symptoms until some significant time later. Because you have the virus, that means you are infectious. And infectious means that you can spread the virus to others because you are infected with it. And so that's what makes the COVID-19 significantly different, is that infectious period is much longer, which means you can have the virus and be spreading it without any symptoms and knowing that you are sick. Um, Treatment, there are established treatments for the flu, antiviral medications to help lessen the severity of the disease once you get it, whereas there is not as many treatments for COVID-19 because it is a new virus. And mainly some of the things about COVID-19 that are different is that it has been documented to be more contagious. It spread more easily than the flu. It has increased probability to cause severe illness and higher mortality rates. In the graphic on the right is showing that. So I think the first graph on the right, on the top, is the U.S. and it's showing flu deaths versus COVID-19 deaths. You see, and this is, on the y-axis, there's, the 20, 40,000, 60,000. You can see that 2019 to 2020, that flu season, we had probably about 10,000, maybe less than 10,000 flu deaths, as opposed to 60,000. That was up to the end of the year. We know that we are well above that now. And then the graph on the bottom is showing in the UK similar results. So if you've heard the expression that this is just like the flu, it indeed is not. It is more infectious and it is shown to be more deadly. Okay. Okay. And so just to talk about, because there's been some in the news around mutations of COVID-19 virus. So viruses frequently mutate. So that's not unexpected and that's not unknown. What is unknown here is that because we're still learning about the virus itself, and so therefore we're now having to learn about the mutations and how they affect us. So there are three known or virus variants that are being tracked right now. One out of the UK, one out of South Africa, and one that was identified in Brazil. The concerns with these viruses is that they have been shown to spread, so they're easier to catch than even original COVID-19, and they're spreading more quickly. And so it has been attributed to increased spread for example, in Brazil, in the countries where it's affected. There's concern and there's some evidence that they may reduce the effectiveness or the way the vaccines that are already on the market may work, because they may affect how they work, the mechanisms by which they work, and that there is some growing body of evidence out of the UK that variant may actually cause more deaths than what we have already been experiencing. So these are a concern, and scientists are again trying to figure this out, but they're learning on the fly because nobody has experienced this before. So things are ever changing, and that's to be expected when you are trying to figure something out. So who's affected? I'm gonna go through this pretty quickly so that we can have time for some other things. But the short answer is that everybody has been affected by this. All age groups, gender, race, ethnicity, where you live. Nobody has been immune to this, both in the U.S. and around the world. So these are just kind of some data that kind of shows that there are some groups who are susceptibility or are more likely conditions, but that nobody is immune from this. So it is a false perception to believe because I'm of a certain age or I live a certain place that I am immune to catching COVID. And as well as deaths, same thing. At all gender, races, where you live, even ages, there have been deaths. Now, there have been significantly less deaths in certain groups, such as the younger age groups have had less death than those who are older age. But again, it is false to say that because I am of a certain group, that I am not susceptible to dying from this condition. Johns Hopkins University has been doing a lot of really good work in terms of tracking COVID and giving data, real-time data, what's happening both in this country and around the world. And so this graph here is showing is tracking COVID over the 90 days. I think the cutoff on this was January 30th. Just so you can see how it's trending. So just to make the point, and this is this is updated every 24 hours. So as of between January 29th and January 30th, there have been 166,000 new COVID cases added in the U.S. So in a 24-hour period, for a total of 25 million cases since the pandemic started. Conversely, in that same 24-hour period, 3,600 people have passed away from COVID in the U.S. for a total of 436,799 people since this pandemic started in the U.S. And this is just in the U.S. This is not around the world. This is just showing you new cases and deaths, the number of people who have tested, and the positivity ratio. That white line there is just showing the number of people who tested and how many tests were positive in relation to the number of people who were tested. And these are just showing some hot spots in the country. So California, here we are in Houston, Southeast Texas. We have some hot spots here and in the Northeast. And Texas here is on the rising in new cases. So we are definitely not out of the woods with this. I'll stop there. The other thing I want to point out too is that, alhamdulillah, case numbers are going down in the U.S., so they're not as bad or they're not rising as they had been. So alhamdulillah, that's a blessing. But they are still very, very high, and so that's what I wanted to point us to. And then again, just looking locally here, this presentation being given in Houston, so looking at the counties that are surrounding Houston. Here are, the numbers of cases that we've had since that started the outbreak. Harris County, which is where Houston is located, has the highest number of incident or new cases of COVID-19 in the state. And then looking at deaths, again, that should be 4,242. Harris County has the most number of cases of deaths from COVID-19 since the start of the pandemic. We are doing, as an area, we're doing a lot better than some other states are doing, but people around us are still getting sick and they're still dying from this. So we can't afford to let our guard down. This graph from the Harris County Public Health, this is just showing Harris County. I wanted to bring our attention to the positivity rate. And so the threshold that the state set of where they wanted to be in terms of the number of, so when you test, the number of people who test positive after receiving a COVID-19 test, they wanted the number of those tests to be 5%. This graph, and this is recently, is showing that positivity rate, based on that purple line, is just below 20%. So we are very, very high. That means a lot of people who are getting tested are testing positive. which also means that there are a lot more people who are not getting tested who are also positive. So that's the concern. And then this is Harris County by zip code. And so the point of this map here is the darker the color, the more cases of COVID in those areas. So if you live in the Harris County area, I see my zip code right now, I won't point it out, but it is definitely not white. So that means that the people that live around you have tested positive, and that there are people around you who have not tested positive, but that doesn't mean that they're not positive, which means that there's high rates of community spread, meaning that you may not know where you catch it from. You can catch it anywhere. And so, again, all pointing to that we are not out of the woods. Okay, so so we talked about what COVID is. We talked about how it got here. We talked about, what it looks like in our communities right now. So how is it spreading? And so it is a virus. So it mostly spreads through droplets or aerosols that you emit through breathing, talking, singing, coughing, sneezing. Some of us may, have recognition that when we cough, we see something come out. We sneeze, we might see something coming out. But know that when you talk, when you're singing, when you yell, anything, when you open your mouth, there you are expelling something, even if you can't see it. And those droplets or those aerosols that are coming out of your nose, your mouth, even out of the tear ducts in your eyes, all of those can contribute to the spread, because the virus inhabits those spaces, and that is the way that it's looking for another host, so it can continue to replicate, continue to multiply, and so it uses that vehicle in order to do that. So this graphic is showing here on the left, if you in the red, if you have somebody who's has COVID-19, that the more people that they're around, the more opportunity for that to spread. And so those droplets are in the air, and then they go into the orifices, or again, nose, mouth of other people. And in fact, they can also be on surfaces, particularly that your face, your eyes, your nose, your mouth, these are all ways that those viruses can spread. It is mostly the research as we have it up to now. It is mostly through the surfaces. Their sense is not as likely that it's passing that way. It's not unlikely, but it's more likely that it's passing through the air, through breathing and other things like that. Okay, so there's two categories of risk factors here: those who are increased risk for infection, and then those who are increased risk for severe illness. So increased risk for infections mean your likelihood that you will be infected with that you can get infected with COVID. And so that's anybody who has interaction with someone who has COVID, whether they know it or not, whether they are symptomatic, exhibiting symptoms to let them know that they might be sick, or asymptomatic, they don't have any symptoms when they're sick. If you're not washing your hands for 20 seconds or more, or regularly, you are at increased risk. If you are in large crowds, particularly if you're in large crowds where there's people are close together and they're not wearing masks, if you're not sufficiently maintaining a 6 feet or more distance from other people, prolonged close interaction. So one of the things about virus or infections is that when there's three main things that increase your risk of infection. One is the exposure if the virus is there. So it's your proximity to it, so the distance the closer you are, the more increased risk you are. The length of time that you are in the environment of something. So if you are around the virus longer, that increases your chances of catching it. And the intensity. So the closer you are to more of the viral particles, the increased likelihood that you can catch the virus. So when you're around people for a longer period of time, the recommendation is 15 minutes or longer, that increases your risk if you are exposed that you will indeed catch the virus. And then we talked about mass use. So that applies to anybody. child, adult, elder, etc. Man, woman, it doesn't matter. Now, those who are at increased risk for severe illness, meaning most people who catch COVID, it is a mild illness. They recover, their body immune system kicks in, they're able to recover lasting effects. But this virus is different because a significant proportion of people, while not the majority, but a too high proportion, don't have that same outcome. And so those who are more at risk for severe illness are the list here. And I'm not going to go into all of them or most of them, but just to give you an idea that these are pretty common conditions that we find in our society, such as cancer, chronic kidney disease, overweight, obesity, high blood pressure, heart disease. These are very common in our communities, and so these all put us at increased risk, which means that that's why we're seeing adverse outcomes in our elder population, but also in our younger population, because they also are faced with these types of chronic pre-existing conditions. Okay, so let's talk a little bit, or why should I think about what are the symptoms that we should be looking for with regard to COVID. So coughing, shortness of breath, difficulty breathing, fever, chills, muscle or body aches, vomiting or diarrhea, new loss of taste or smell. These symptoms, again, these symptoms can range from mild to severe, and they can increase in severity over time. And they typically appear 2 to 14 days after you're exposed. Which what that means is that it can appear on day 2 after you've been affected, or day 14 after you've been affected. But in that time, until symptom onset, you are infectious, meaning you can still share that virus or give that virus to others during that time before you present the symptoms. And so one of the other things that's important about this is that even for those who get COVID and they don't have severe illness, or even if they do, that there are long-term complications. So there are some who say, well, if I get it, I'll just be down for a couple of days and then I'll be good. Well, studies have shown that people are facing long-term complications from this that are lasting weeks and months after they are no longer infectious and no longer testing positive for COVID. Some of those include fatigue, chest pain, joint pain, a prolonged loss of smell or taste, memory issues, organ damage that can be irreversible. So it is not just, I'm young, I can, or I'm healthy and I can beat this. There are long-term complications that are not predictable with regard to COVID. Okay. And so then the question is, they say ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And so our first line of defense is trying to prevent getting the virus in the first place. And so here's another graphic, because I like my graphics apparently, to talk about ways that we can prevent the spread of COVID and other respiratory illnesses. So again, washing your hands often, regularly, for at least 20 seconds with soap and water. Cleaning your surfaces that you use often, like doorknobs, light fixtures, things like that. If you are coughing and sneezing, to cough into a tissue or into your elbow. When you leave out the house, wearing a mask, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Let's see. Maintaining our distance from other people, being sure not to touch our face and our hands and our mouths without washing our hands, but trying to avoid that altogether, and then maintaining our distance from other people. And then, very important, if you are feeling sick or you're starting to sneeze or cough, like to isolate yourself from other people until you know whether you have COVID or not, because you should assume that COVID is all around you and you have been exposed. You should assume that in terms of the numbers and cases that are out there. We're getting a little long, so I'm gonna try to move on from this. Also, if you know you've been exposed to someone who has had COVID, then you need to be quarantining, and that means isolating yourself from other people until your tests come back negative and you don't present with symptoms for at least 10 days. So, mask has been a very controversial thing, unfortunately, and so I wanted to show why it's important, like why masks are so important to this effort. So in this first graphic, the person is going to be counting to 10 and 4 different, one with no mask in the far left corner. On this far right corner as 1 layer mask, down the bottom is 2 layers, and then there's a surgical mask. But as you can see, as she's counting, she's expelling droplets out of her mouth and her nose naturally, even if you can't see it. And so when she doesn't have any protection, those droplets are coming out more forcefully, so a higher concentration, and they are traveling longer distances. But when the mask is on, even a basic layer of protection, it helps to keep not as many droplets coming out, and they're not going as far. This here is showing what happens when you cough. With the different type, no mask versus the different types of masks that you can use. And again, when you're coughing, that is going further. So it can, the 6 feet comes in. Studies have shown that when people cough, that 6 feet, or it's 3 feet really, that is where it's the highest concentration of viral particles. So they gave 6 feet, but really you want to keep as far distance as possible, because when you're coughing or sneezing, that it can go further than 6 feet. Some cases. And again, this is making that point that it's not that nothing comes out of the mask, it's that far fewer concentration comes out, and it goes shorter distances. So if you're keeping your space from somebody, you're less likely to be affected by those particles. Thank you. Okay. So with regards to masks, the recommendations from the Centers for Disease Control are to wear masks that have 2 or more layers of washable, breathable fabric. Very important. It's a pet peeve of mine. I go to the market, I go to the store, and people are wearing a mask. In order for the mask to be effective, it needs to cover both your mouth and your nose. There's more viral particles and more particles that come out of your nose than come out of your mouth. So if you are wearing it over your mouth and not over your nose, you might as well not wear it, in terms of conferring protection to yourself and to others. And it should fit snugly around your face, so that again it traps whatever you are expelling, and it keeps out what others are expelling around you. In terms of types of masks not to choose, so anything that's made that's hard to breathe, like vinyl, anything that's really thin, you want to have multiple layers. And then the mask with the valves. So the issues with the valves is that they they might be more breathable, but they allow particles to get out, so they're not protecting other people when you are wearing them. So if you have COVID, you are still exposing people to your. I'm sorry.
Still exposing people to a higher concentration.
Yeah, you're still exposing people to your particles. And so the graphic on the right is just talking about how not to wear a mask. None of these are appropriate ways of wearing a mask. Also, the gaiters, again, you want to make sure that it's double layer at least. The ones that you just pull up over your face, or you wear around your neck, pull over your face, you want to make sure that it is double layer, because the 1 layer is just not enough protection. And face shields are not recommended without a mask. Now, you can wear it with a mask, but the mask is always the case. And then with regard to children, you want to make sure that it fits properly. It's a size appropriate for their face. And that, again, is covering your nose and mouth. And children under 2 are not recommended to wear masks. Okay. Vaccination. Last thing. I'm going to briefly gloss over this because we don't have enough time to really talk about this. But my point of this graphic is to show that the importance of vaccination. So vaccination is historically has been the introduction of an inactivated foreign particle in your body so that your body can build up an immune response to it, so that when it is exposed to the actual virus, that it already has tools in place to fight it, so that you don't get as sick as you would if you didn't have that immunity already. And so what we have seen historically from vaccinations, this here graph in the U.S. is that at the turn of the 20th century, the top leading causes of death were infectious diseases that you catch from other people. And so this here is showing that those were the leading causes of death in this country. And then when vaccines came along and mass vaccination programs came along, that means that a lot of people were getting vaccinated at one time, and you heard this herd immunity. So the community was being immunized from those vaccinations. That those trends shifted. So now our primary causes of death, top causes of death, are from chronic diseases, not infectious diseases. Diseases like polio, we have completely eradicated with vaccination. Measles was significantly reduced, almost non-existent until recently, but that vaccinations historically have worked to reduce the people catching the disease, and even if they do catch it with the vaccination, reducing the severity of the outcomes from that disease. Okay. And this is just a graphic to kind of show how vaccinations work. That the more people vaccinated in the environment, that even if you come in contact with somebody who is infectious, as indicated in red, that those people are still, that it still reduces, more people vaccinated in the environment reduces the number of people who will ultimately get sick from that virus, even when exposed to someone who has it. So wrap this up. Ultimately, we can get to the end of this. Unfortunately, and this is just my personal opinion, that we have had a failure of national and leadership in terms of the management of this virus. There are the U.S. has done the poorest in terms of having the number of deaths and number of cases of COVID, even on some countries that are significantly less wealth than the U.S. And it's mostly because of poor leadership and poor preparation and execution when it comes to maintaining this. But we can, and it's going to take all of us to do it. So there are multiple steps. There's personal prevention, which is what we talked about today, vaccination, testing, contact tracing, which means, when somebody comes up with the virus, investigating all the people that were around them, letting them know so that they can quarantine themselves to stop the spread from other people, quarantine, isolation, and treatment. So all of these things is what's going to ultimately get us out of this. What we can do is protect ourselves and protect our families by trying to prevent this as much as we can. So with that, I will stop. If you have any questions, please put those in the chat, but the presentation is not over yet. So now we're going to shift for a few minutes to talk to those who have had some personal experience with COVID and its effects. Okay, here we go. And our first presenters today is Brother Mustafa and Sister Sandira, who will talk about their personal experiences with overcoming COVID.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
So we were diagnosed with, I was diagnosed with COVID-19 early December. And for me, it started with tickling in my throat, just And since I'm immunocompromised, since for the last 9 months, 10 months, I've been one of those who've isolated at home. I wasn't going out to dinner with friends, or we were doing grocery pickup, taking all the precautions. But even with all of that, I ended up contracting the virus. So as soon as I felt a tickle in my throat, I was like, "What is that?" I don't. And so I took notice of it. But by the second day, when I felt myself achy and chills, I was like, "It feels like the flu." And we've been inundated with what's COVID, what are the signs and the symptoms. So I immediately went and had a test done the next day, and it came back positive, which was a shock to me. Um, my husband didn't catch it or contract it until about a week and a half later, but we had the typical symptoms: the chills, the fever, headache, fatigue, body aches, lost the taste, cough, difficulty breathing was probably one of the. It started out mild and then it progressed as the weeks or as the week went on. So for me, that became my worst symptom. But what we did immediately is, once the symptoms onset, we started logging our oxygen saturation, because we called our doctors, and the doctors are pretty much like, if you're not in, having breathing difficulties, is where you can't breathe at all, you're not going to be admitted to the hospital. Don't even try going to the ER. So just rest, take fluids. They were like, take Tylenol. That was like the instructions for the doctor, and call us if it gets worse. So we were sort of on our own as it pertains to, just managing it. So what I was just like, we at least need to log what's happening to us. So about 4 times a day, we would log our oxygen saturation and our pulse and our temperature. And we use we have Samsung phones. So on Samsung phones, there's a health app. I think with the iPhone, I think you may have to pay for it, but it has a pulse ox on. You can use using your finger on the back of your phone to measure your pulse as well as your blood oxygen levels. So we also had an external one that we purchased back in March, just in case, was less than $20 on Amazon. So we but health wise, we sort of drank. I was drinking lemon tea, honey. I didn't have much appetite once my loss of taste went away. You sort of don't want to eat, which is not a good thing, but it happens. But I think logging our data was key, especially once my SAT started to drop. My oxygen dropped to 92%, 90 on a couple of days. We had some friends in the medical field, and they intervened and said, follow certain protocols as it pertains to sleeping on our stomach, increasing our supplements like zinc, vitamin C, and vitamin D, doing breathing exercises with the spirometer, which is sort of, they give you it in the hospital, but you can order them on Amazon. That was the only thing we didn't have, was the spirometer. So we went to YouTube and actually looked up how to perform the strengthening exercises, breathing exercises, to strengthen your rib muscles and the muscles around your lungs, to strengthen those. But spirometer on Amazon is less than $10 also. So eventually I did call my doctors, and they prescribed zithromycin and albuterol for me. But my condition was still sort of getting worse as it pertains to my oxygen. So I was actually, I had to push back actually with my doctors, because I asked about the monoclonal antibody treatment, which they talked about on the news, for treating people who were having severe symptoms, but they weren't bad enough to go to the hospital or the emergency room. So I had to actually intervene for myself and push back as it pertains to my immunocompromised situation. And I did finally get the monoclonal antibody treatment. And it was almost 24 hours later, I was immediately better. Mental fog lifted. A lot of my other symptoms went away because the zithromycin and the albuterol just weren't doing the trick. That was around the time my husband, when I started feeling better, that's when he started saying, it's hot upstairs. He was isolating upstairs. So he would come and check on me, but I think he was checking on me too much. That's probably how he contracted it, because he was really worried about me because he knew my situation. So he ended up contracting it, and it was about a week and a half later. But he was just saying the heat is too hot upstairs, and I was just like, it's not that hot in the house, you know. I was like, what else? What other symptoms are you having? He just kept saying it's hot upstairs, and he wasn't checking his temperature. So I don't know if you want to sort of talk about the fact that he was sort of in COVID denial, because I kept asking him, what other symptoms are you having? You know, are you having, you know, chills or aches? And he was saying, no, it's just hot. So
yeah, that's correct. Because I was still working at home. Once I got the call from my wife, they immediately sent me home and with all my stuff to work from home from that point. So I was still able to work from home. I was still kind of, you know, dealing with this temperature issue for whatever reason. I wasn't having any other symptom, but just when I would finish working, I would just be hot all the time. I would turn fans on, trying to figure out how to cool off. So that was the symptom that I had the most, was just the my temperature. And like my wife was saying, I was not checking my temperature because I didn't, you know, I guess I felt good, but I should have been checking it. And that because of my temperature, when I did check it, it was like 101, you know, possibly 102.
but it only took like a couple of days. It was only like that a day or so before I said, no, you need to check your temperature.
Yes.
And then, of course, after that, he started having some of the other symptoms, the fatigue, the body aches, the cough, which lasted for us for a couple of weeks. But I think for us, the most beneficial thing was just making sure we kept on top of our symptoms. I think if we hadn't done that, if we didn't have access to the thermometers and the pulse ox readers, I think we probably could have ended up easily in an ER, keeping track of that, and then reaching out to our medical professionals and asking for assistance when, you know, I think that's one of the main things that helped us and kept us from, you know, we fully recovered now. And I'm Sandir, and this is Mustafa, by the way. We didn't even say that. I saw him like at the beginning. But I think that's what kept us out of the emergency room, especially me. And Mustafa was over his in about a week and a half, and it took me probably a complete month to recover. And it's probably only been a couple of weeks since I've gotten my energy back. So that's one of the lingering effects. And actually for me, I also had some AFib. But my cardiologist and I determined that it was probably just from potassium deficiency and malnutrition, just because I hadn't been eating for probably a whole week. I hadn't really eaten much. And, you know, if your electrolytes are off balance, you will experience rapid heartbeat or irregular heartbeat. So once I started eating again, my appetite picked up, my AFibs went away. And that was also we were also able to track that on our phones using the Samsung Health device. The ECG is a good feature. So I definitely would recommend that to people who are, you know, may find that they're suffering. But please don't delay if you feel any type of symptom going and just getting a test. We had a rapid test. Our results were back in a couple of hours. So it was relatively painless.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. And the reason why we invited you all here is because, unfortunately, there may be some who think that COVID is not real. Unfortunately, so would you agree that COVID is not real based on your experience?
No, it's very much real. And it deals with people differently. So you don't completely get the same symptoms all the time, but you have to be aware of the symptoms that you do get, that you need to follow up on them. And I think one of the things that is causing that one to, you know, think that it's not real, because they either don't know anyone that has had it, or they have not gotten it. And so the key thing is to prevent from getting it. You do not want to play with it. So I would tell anyone, do not, you know, do what's suggested to kind of lower your chances of contracting it, and then listen, you know, to those who have had it, and just, you know, move forward with your life.
Especially if you have someone in your family who may be immunocompromised, because we think we may have been exposed at the same time, but because of my immunocompromised state, the virus was like, my body was like, come on in, have a seat. Versus him, it took him a whole week a week and a half later for him to show symptoms or anything. But for me, it took literally 2 to 3 days after we think the initial exposure happened for me to have symptoms. So just listen to your body, and anything abnormal, I would definitely say at least call your medical professionals and find a testing location.
I want to add just one last thing, because sometimes people think that they're in such good shape. You know, this is a respiratory disease, so it doesn't really matter what shape you're in. Just be careful and just take all the precautions that you can.
But being in good health does help you to
Fight
to
it.
fight,
It-
right?
yes.
Right. So definitely take care of your health, and do those boosting things that you can do, so that you have more strength and reserve to fight when if exposed, inshallah. So thank you so much for being willing to share your experience. I know that's not easy, especially in a public platform. So we really appreciate you being willing to generously share what it was like for you, so as to encourage others to, take the necessary precautions to protect themselves and their families. And before we bring in our next speaker, I just want to add briefly that even if you do recover quickly and you have minimal symptoms, thinking about those around you who are immunocompromised, and if they are exposed, will they have the same outcomes that you have?
Right.
And so I know for us as a family, our children have been home since March from school. And even though, children, especially in their age group, are, have not presented with high numbers of the virus, and even when they get it, they tend to do fairly well. We have elder members of our family, those who have pre-existing conditions, and so for us, it was too much of a risk. And alhamdulillah, we were in a position where we could manage them being home and school and things like that. But that was, we took that stance, even if it's it's a little inconvenient sometimes. We took that stance, not just to protect ourselves, but to protect our loved ones,
Right.
who might not be able to fare as well as they might, or as we might, from this. So I think that's a really, really important point to make.
And we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for you guys' speedy recovery, and that He grants a speedy recovery for all the other believers out there who are infected or who come in contact with this disease.
Alhamdulillah.
So thank you again. So we're going to bring in our next presenter. If she could turn on her camera and let us know that you are there. There we go. Okay. So we're going to. Assalamu alaikum, you're on mute.
I was just really absorbing all of the information. Assalamu alaikum. Do you want me to go ahead and introduce myself? Or?
So sure. But this is Dr. Constance Shabazz, and she'll talk a little more about herself. But she's going to talk about her experience with COVID vaccination, inshallah.
Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, and thank you for inviting me for this COVID-sations. I like the title. I am a physician by training, and I actually reside in the Austin area. And I have recently taken the COVID vaccine. I took the Moderna vaccine about 3 weeks ago, and so I will be setting up my final appointment, I hope, for the second vaccine within the next week, inshallah. So I just want to talk a little bit about, COVID-19 and the vaccine piece. I just, first of all, want to say that I'm thankful to Allah that the brother and sister have not only just recovered and in the process of recovering, but the fact that they really advocated for themselves. And I have to say that, unfortunately, that's where we are in this whole journey with COVID-19, that oftentimes, because of the fast moving information that is coming out as we go through this pandemic together, that oftentimes we can't keep up with all the changes. And so, but you know your body best. And so it's great to hear that you all were aware of how you were feeling, and you reached out, and you were able to access the resources that helped you through your recovery. So I thank you for sharing that. So my experience with the vaccine, I decided, and I tell people all the time, I had no death wish, because, we've had a lot of issues around the concern about the vaccine and its safetiness. I watch the science. I read, voraciously about COVID-19. I use credible sources as much as we can, as fast moving as things are going. And I decided early on, when the time came for my group, which included people over 65 and folks who had pre-existing condition, that I would step forward and take advantage. I was watching the data, seeing what the reactions were, the side effects, deaths, from the vaccine. And so I had the opportunity of actually being contacted by my primary care provider here in the Austin area. And I stood with probably 300 or 400 or 500 people for a couple of hours on long lines in a recreation center in the center of Austin. And but it gave me the opportunity to observe people who actually received the vaccine. They had it very well organized, so that as you were traversing through the line, you had your vaccine, they allowed for people to sit in an open area for about 15 to 30 minutes. And so we actually got to observe, how people seem to be reacting in the immediate, after the immediate vaccination. And also we know that there were EMTs that were on site just in case. Well, both there were EMTs who actually giving the vaccine, as well as EMT set up outside of the venue. So I say that my experience was a very positive one. I know that there have been a lot of problems in many states, Texas included, in terms of making sure that there is going to be, for those who are receiving the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine, which are a two-shot process, that there's actually going to be enough of the vaccine to give that second shot. So I will find out this week whether or not, I will be able to get that shot in a timely manner. But I just want to speak a little bit about some of the concerns that oftentimes have come across. I mean, Sister Salimah knows that it was just really at the beginning of the COVID-19 vaccine that I had actually been asked to do a radio program on AM 360 called Health Talk 360. And I thought I was just going to talk about general health and wellness, only to find myself in the midst of talking about COVID-19. So as a result of the research we had to do, and a lot of the questions that came up particularly from the African American community about, what is this thing, this COVID-19, how are we going to, as a people, respond to having a vaccine? Is this going to be just another situation with our medical system where we're going to be used as guinea pigs to test out something and not knowing what the effect is going to be on us? So I've been very, very attentive to staying on top of what the science is saying, to be able to share information, not to force anybody to make any decision. Like I said, I made that personal decision based on, my research and how I felt, that I would benefit, not only just for myself, but also for those around me. So just want to talk about a couple of points, because Sister Salimah has done an excellent job of giving very detailed information about COVID-19 and how we should protect ourselves. So I'm just going to try to fill in a few gaps. And so one of the questions that oftentimes comes to me, and you hear about, well, okay, these vaccines, are they going to be harmful to us? Are they going to change our genetic makeup? And that's a big question that comes up. Well, these vaccines that are out right now, the ones of the Pfizer, Moderna, and also the Johnson & Johnson, which will probably be made available very soon, they are only using components of the virus, but they're not active. They're not active components of the virus. In other words, they don't replicate and cause you to have the infection. But what they do is that they teach your cells how to respond to the virus. As Sister Salimah mentioned earlier, we are actually born with a lot of immune cells. We call them macrophages. We have T lymphocytes. We have antibodies. The thing about it is that these are what we call nascent, or they're not really mature. And so just like when a baby is born, a baby oftentimes will not be able to fend themselves against certain viruses, and that's why the value, alhamdulillah, that we have in the mother's breast milk, because the mother can transmit some of those mature antibodies to the baby to protect them. So in the same way that baby does not have those mature cells, we don't always have the cells in our body that are ready to respond to every insult that we have, being it a virus or a bacteria. And so that's why this new virus, we're not able to respond like we would if our body had already been used to it. So these vaccines that we're talking about, they have the ability to produce certain proteins, that those spiky things that we see all the time that our third grader can now draw, the COVID vaccine, those proteins, it helps to generate those proteins in the body. And that means that those cells, those immune cells, like the T lymphocytes and the antibodies, they see that as something foreign, and they react to it by being able to produce antibodies and also produce an immune response. So for those of you who are concerned it's going to change your whole, what we call genome, no, we're only really targeting certain cells within the body to be able to react to that virus. Another thing is that a concern is like the side effects. Recently I saw where there was a sister who claimed she was a nurse, and so she said, look what happened after I took the vaccine. Well, actually there's a difference between what we call adverse reactions or an immune reaction. So some of the things that we're hearing about, okay, you take the shot. Obviously, for me, the only real so-called reaction was that I had some tenderness at the area where I had the injection. Okay, and if I felt it, it seemed like it felt a little warm. There may have been a little bit of swelling, but those are really signs that your immune system, alhamdulillah, is responding. So these are not bad things. These are letting you know that you have an immune system that is responsive to the vaccine, and which is very critical. So not all side effects are dangerous, like I said. You have to understand what is normal, a normal response, and they'll be able to determine those that are a signal or a sign for something that is more dangerous. So things like, shortness of breath or tightening in the throat, those are life-threatening types of events. And so this is usually an overreactivity of your immune system. And of course, we have heard of instances where that has happened. Typically, the people who have those reactions have a known history of side effects, of being able to react or have allergies, and they tend to react not just to the COVID vaccine, but maybe other substances, So these are the people that even with some what we call pre-treatment, things like Benadryl or steroids, can still take the vaccine if they're in a high-risk group of individuals, okay? And so we have to learn the difference between that. Just having no reaction does not mean that, oh, okay, well, that means it's a better vaccine. Having some level of reaction, but a safe reaction, is an indicator that your immune system is responding and hopefully producing those antibodies that will be protective for you if you are actually exposed to and infected by the virus. So, I tell people, let's look at it this way. If you're thinking about taking the vaccine, let's think about a couple of things. The sister talked about, the different pre-existing conditions that predispose you to respond to COVID-19 worse than someone else, okay? Maybe more than just a mild or moderate response. But I say for those of you all who are considering this, okay, so let's say you have pre-existing conditions. But I also say factor in other things. Do you work? Do you go to school? Do you reside in a situation where you're around other people and other people who may be infected by the virus. Okay, so you have to consider things like that, or you should, I should say. You live in a household where you have multiple family members, and particularly if you have family members, or I would say other people in the household, they don't have to be family members, but people who are going back and forth in and out of the house. You have no idea, where they're going, who they're exposed to, whether or not they're using those preventive measures that Sister Salimah talked about, whether they're keeping the mask on, or they have the appropriate layers of masking, whether or not they're washing their hands, what are they bringing into the household? And there's just no way that the average person can monitor somebody else's goings and comings. So that's another risk factor that you have to take in consideration. And whether or not, like I said, even in the house, just practicing, the disinfecting and all of those other things that are important, because even with the vaccine is too new for us to determine its overall longevity of its effectiveness. And by that, I mean, we know that right now, we're not quite sure, but why, but we are seeing a decline in the number of infections and deaths to a certain degree. But we're not sure if there's any immediate impact as a result of the vaccine or other things. I mean, people are we are posturing that some people have been changing their behaviors because of the uptick over the past several weeks in terms of the numbers of both infections and death. So we don't know, and we won't know for a while how long the effectiveness of the vaccines are going to last. So that said, and even for people who have had the COVID-19, there's a recommendation that you still get the vaccine, as well as you can continue those preventive measures that we have. Okay, and the masking, and we talked about recently with the new variants that even though it seems right now that those variants from the UK, from South Africa, and from Brazil, that the current vaccines are effective against them, the viruses are mutating all the time. Okay, that is Allah's way of putting in that part of his creation, a mechanism of self-preservation. Okay, and until we get to the point where we have enough people who are vaccinated, and means that we have fewer people who can transmit this, then we're still going to have to carry on those safety precautions, even in the face of even the best vaccine. I don't want people to be turned off by what they've heard recently with regards to certain vaccines, like the Johnson & Johnson vaccine being less effective. It doesn't mean it's less effective in terms of it doesn't work at all. It really means in terms of whether or not, I think it's 66% of people will not have any symptoms at all. Okay, as opposed to, we talk about Moderna, we talk about Pfizer, it's 95% or so. But it doesn't mean that it necessarily means that you're going to be more likely to have the severe infections and deaths. Okay, so it may be that you have mild or moderate symptoms right now. But like you said, these viruses, they mutate, they change, and at some point in time, it may come to a point where these vaccines are not as effective. Okay, it may be like with the flu. It may, in the sense of we had to have a combination of different vaccines to be able to give the vast majority of people enough immunity against it. So these are just some things that I wanted to share with you. And just one couple of last things. Understand that there are different kinds of treatment. The prevention is the number one. Things like the remdesivir and monoclonal, that's to help to ward off for those people who are high risk, but also people who have mild symptoms. And then also the last thing, what we just talked about, is the vaccine. So may Allah bless each and every one of us to stay safe and healthy and practice, the best practices to get through this pandemic on the other side safely. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam. Alhamdulillah. Thank you so much, Dr. Constance, for sharing with us today. We had a few questions. Again, this is not meant to give medical advice, But for those who have asked a question with regard to the specific situation, pregnancy or other pre-existing conditions, and whether it's recommended to get the vaccination, the advice is that you talk to your doctor, your healthcare provider, because they know your case best, and they should be able to answer those questions more completely. But as Dr. Constance just mentioned, that having pre-existing condition doesn't necessarily eliminate you from being able to take the vaccination. And so that's why it's really important that you talk to your doctor about these matters, because they know your case the best. And so, Dr. Constance, did you have anything to add to that?
Well, I'm going to just say, I saw that there was a question about pregnancy. I cannot speak for your particular situation in terms of pregnancy, but if you check the CDC's website, pregnancy is considered a condition where you would consider having the vaccine.
And then another question was with regard to mask recommendations, and so and the tier of masks. So N95 is kind of the gold standard in terms of masks. Those they both protect the wearer and those outside. Those who are not wearing the mask, because they catch those small particles and keep them from escaping. But those are, mostly they're hard to find because they're mostly reserved for healthcare workers who are coming in regular contact with COVID-19 patients. KN95, you can purchase those online. Those have been shown to be effective. You just have to be careful, do a little bit of research in terms of on the particular brand or the manufacturer who's producing that, because there may be some issues in terms of effectiveness. But generally, they are, typically the better protection. And as we are moving into a phase of COVID variants, there's more recommendation around getting more of these types of masks because they offer more protection, the most protection on the market. But then double masking with the cloth mask is still been shown to be pretty effective at preventing the spread of COVID, if nothing more than preventing you from spreading any infectiousness that you have to others. And if everybody is wearing a mask, then everybody's protected at that point, because everybody's preventing at least their germs, for lack of a better term, from spreading to others. So I hope that answers your question. But there are a lot of good information. CDC.gov.gov is a good resource. So is the World Health Organization is a good resource. Johns Hopkins University is another good resource for getting information about COVID and masks. Also, Mayo Clinic, MAYO, is again another really good resource for information on mask and other things related to COVID. We have another question. Okay, alhamdulillah. And but the overall takeaway message, inshallah, today is that our situation is not hopeless. There are things that we can do and that have been shown to work to protect ourselves, to protect our families, to protect our communities. We know we want to see each other again. We want to be able to give each other hugs, and we want to be able to do that safely. And if we take the proper precautions on our end, and we do that as a community, then inshallah that if we change our situation, Allah will change the circumstance for us, inshallah. So I hope that what we have said here has been beneficial, and anything that we have said in error is our mistake, and may Allah forgive us and may you forgive us. And if anything that happened here was beneficial, that it came from Allah and Allah alone, and we ask Allah to accept our efforts. We ask Allah to protect us and our families and our communities so that we can continue to serve Him and to love on each other, inshallah, in person, because that's we need that social and physical interaction. So any other closing thoughts or comments?
We'd just like to thank all of our panelists and all of our presenters for sharing their information, and we pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows it to be beneficial to you all. And with that, we'll go ahead and conclude and move into our general announcements. All right. So, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So these are our community announcements. We have a virtual khutbah every Friday at 1:30 p.m. With Imam Wazir Ali and his assistant Imam. So please join us. That's on our Facebook or YouTube page. Please like and subscribe so that we can continue to bring excellent content like this. We also have our Taleem. This is one example of our Taleem. Every Sunday at 1:30, we have a rotation between the brothers, sisters, the youth, pioneers. So every Sunday is something a little different. So please join us on Sundays for our 1:30 Taleem. And programs like this only can be come to you through your donations. So please help us to keep our StreamYard and the Masjid and other things running by making donations to the sites that you see in front of you. cashApp, PayPal, Zelle, or just going to www.masjidwdm.com. Also, if you're a attender of Mercy Community Center, you can make your donations at www.mercycc.org/donation. But wherever you are, please donate to your local masjid. We continue to have our new Muslim orientation class Sundays at 3 p.m. Brother Elijah Salahuddin. For more details, you can email Brother Elijah at elijah@masjidwdmuhammad.com, or you can join Tiny CC New Muslim Class. New Muslim Class have to be capitalized. The Sisters Halakha is every second and fourth Saturday of the month from 7:30 to 9:30 a.m. To gain access, please email Sister Salimah Cogbill at gmail.com. We continue to have our opportunities for you to make your donations to the Ibrahim Kamaluddin Community Center and the fundraising donor wall that will be there, where you can get your name on one of the 99 names of Allah. So please go to tinyurl.com/MWDM donor wall to make your donation. We continue to have our brothers meeting every Saturday, every third Saturday of the month from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. Brothers only. It's tinyurl.com/WDM brothers. Imam Eugene Farouk continues to sell all of your Islamic media and artifacts. In addition, he has the commentary on selected verses of the Holy Quran, documentation from the teachings of Imam Worthy Muhammad for sale. And you can also join the Islamic Learning Institute's online Arabic classes by going to Islamic, ISLAMICLI.org to sign up with all of the different presenters that they have there. And those are our community announcements. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.